In part one, we established that a splayed track that's showing dew claws is not a good indicator of whether a track was made by a buck or a doe. It does, however, tell us that that animal was moving fast. So imagine we're out pre-rut, dry ground, tough tracking conditions, and we do find a track. Let's talk about 3 essential principles we can apply to that track and to any other sign that we're finding in the woods. Number 1, we can use the size of tracks as a guide, but it requires that we're familiar with fawn tracks, yearling tracks, doe tracks, and the biggest bucks to be found on our landscape. Research using hoof measurements shows that there is so much overlap between bucks and does that trying to tell the difference from tracks is essentially useless, except for those big buck outliers. They do stand out, and so we should know what their tracks look like. This also means that we want to know when the fawns are showing up and how big their tracks are, and how big their tracks are going to be through the fall into spring and all the way until they graduate to yearlings when the next fawns drop. Number 2, when it's possible, look at the difference in size between the front and hind track. This is controversial because both males and females have front feet that are larger than hind feet. And there's been other studies that have looked at the size ratio between the front and hind hooves in male and female deer, and that have shown that that proportion is very similar. However, paying attention to this feature has still proven useful, and it does train us to look for subtle morphological differences in tracks that we're finding. So, are the front and hind tracks that you have found more similar in size, suggesting does or younger bucks, or is there a more noticeable difference between the two, like we often see in mature, large-bodied bucks? Number 3, we want to know as much as we can about deer behavior. This is going to be absolutely essential to our entire ability to make accurate interpretations of things that we are finding out in the woods, and this applies to all wildlife. For deer, there's 2 primary seasonal life cycles that we want to pay attention to start. For one, what month is the peak rut for deer in our area, and how is that affecting behavior and social structure? The second one is what month are the fawns showing up on our landscape, and how is that impacting behavior and social structure? If we find a track, we of course want to consider its size, but we're also looking for associated sign nearby. Are we finding other tracks that range in size that indicate that mixed age group of does and young? Or are all the tracks you're finding of similar size and on the larger end, which would indicate a bachelor group? If I'm out and I find what looks like a doe track, I'll immediately begin to just look for other tracks to see if I can see some of that range. But instead I might find scats, and I say, oh look, these are all scats of the same age. Look, here's some little ones and here's some big ones. Oh, look at that, there's a fawn track. Okay, cool, I know I'm on a group of does and young. The same applies to other sign like beds. As soon as we start seeing beds, we can ask ourselves, are there any size differences that we can look for? And what's so cool about all of this is even if we're not coming up with the accurate conclusions every time, filtering every sign that we are finding out there in the woods through these questions will reveal new information and change the way we start thinking about deer and learning about deer. So how do you all find bucks on your landscape? What are the things that you've learned in all the time that you've spent out there? If you're willing, drop that into the comments so that we can all learn from it. All right, thanks y'all.